My name is Lizbeth Goodman. I am the Professor of Inclusive Design at University College Dublin, where I'm also Chair of Creative Technology, Innovation, and Director of the SMARTLAB Centre. I think the Voice Project is, to my mind, one of the most important research projects and art intervention projects going on in the world. And I genuinely mean that. It is in some ways a continuation of really groundbreaking work that began way back before the turn of the millennium with the Radical Project and then with subsequent projects growing out of networks of artists, including women artists. Over decades now, the team who put together Voice have a unique set of voices to share from the team itself and from the extensive networks that we've all built up over decades. So what we want to do with Voice is really make all the artists' interventions heard and the needs of communities heard as well. The Radical Project, which I had the great honor to lead back in 1998 until 2001, 2002. Radical stands for Research Agendas Developed in Creative Arts Labs. So it was a really pioneering project for the European Commission under the IST 5 program, which aimed to make artists recognizable as researchers. At the time, that was not the case. It also aimed to bring women and diverse community members who were practitioners in the arts, but also had either political or curricular educational aims together so that we broke out of the silos where everything was science-based, research equated to science. We really looked at what would happen if we formed an interdisciplinary network across cultures and languages where women and artists more generally could lead a serious scientific research program. So everything we did brought technology into the arts and the arts into technology. And the European Commission named us as the permanent platform for art, technology, and society. This project, Radical, led to some fantastic friendships. It led to very long-term collaborations. Many of the people participating in Voice now were either members of the Radical Consortium way back when, or were participants in events who over time we got to know. So that the kind of networks of networks that grow in Voice, to my mind, a lot of that started with the Radical Consortium. And the other piece of Radical that was crucial and that we are developing very fully in Voice was the idea that scientific research doesn't need to only present in academic peer-reviewed papers or in Nature magazine or in a laboratory with test tubes, that research through the arts, which intervenes in society in real ways, is not only equal to other kinds of more typical scientific research, but is in itself really radical in that it takes the views of diverse communities and puts them at the center, in that it takes creative approaches, or what the EU now is calling transversal skills, right? In the olden days, it was just known as art, and it was out there on the margins. Those skills of collaboration, creativity, empathy, turn-taking, teamwork come into these projects, both from Radical through the STARTS program, through the Where Sustain program, through other programs that evolved. And now in Voice, it's our really exciting chance to say, hey, we've been around for decades and this network is unstoppable. Voice will have many outputs, and of course, very interesting reports will be submitted to the Commission, as is right, for a major funded project. However, the artwork itself and the impact in the community is the genuine, the motivating, and the impactful result of the Voice project. So there will be 20 communities transformed through an intervention with an artist. There will be 20 artists whose practice and ways of understanding their practice will be transformed by working with those communities. And in addition to all the other deliverables, I have the honor to be working on what we call the Voices of Voice, which is more than a collection of interviews, but a beginning of a map, beyond the digital mapping tool as well. The actual words that the artists who've been involved in this network for decades are bringing in, and the responses from younger artists who are joining. So our aim with that Voices of Voice is to share in both digital and analog print book form the results of all of this amazing work, and also to lay a foundation so that no one has to reinvent the wheel. The networks can be added to. They're rhizomatic networks, meaning they share roots, but they pop up all over Europe and all over the world, as sharing a common root with voice, radical starts, etc. So it's very exciting to me to have those voices captured, and particularly at this moment when some of us, I'll be 60 in a few weeks, and some of the artists in our network are considerably older. A lot of the work of this network, the elder generation, has not been captured, or was captured briefly in other projects, which were then the websites were dismantled when or unplugged along the way, when project funding ended. So again, if we can capture and make a genuinely permanent platform in Word, in analog version, and also online, and if we can fight for a sustainability platform that would keep all the results of voice, but also the results of all the other projects that could be added to it, that would be really transformative. So inclusive design is one of the methodologies I prefer to engage with in any part of the research in my whole life and approach. Inclusive design says that nobody needs to be disabled. Nobody needs to be treated as an outlier or an edge user or a deviation from some imagined norm in society. Inclusive design says there is no norm from which some of us deviate. We are all unique. It's a one-size-fits-one model developed by Professor Jutta Treviranus in Canada, who will be one of the voices of voice I will interview. Jutta's work is absolutely foundational in understanding a development over time from the assumption that there was a universal person for whom everything should be designed, and the unconscious bias beyond that meant that typically that normal person, at least in consumer culture, was imagined to be usually a white man and usually somebody who was fully able to hold things, lived in a developed part of the world where technology had good reach and where people in general have the economic ability to buy whatever gadget or tool or new development it was, that universal design was aiming at. So we argue in the inclusive design movement, and it is a movement. It's not a religion, it's not a cult, but it's a movement in the sense that it asks people to change their way of thinking about everything in the world, not just how you would design a better cup or a better art program or a better school for people with disabilities, but how you design your own path through society, treating everyone as equal, but in equitable form. So the difference again between equality and equity being, well, if you give everyone the same bicycle, some people will be exactly the right stature and ability to ride it very well and will succeed in a bike race. If that same bike for someone who needs a wheelchair or who's very petite or particularly large or whatever it might be is not equal. So we don't want to provide equal tools to society. We want to provide equitable tools, meaning appropriate to each individual. So with voice, what we're trying to do is not only with the PCR methodology, but with an inclusive design framework around the whole project, is encourage these amazing artists who are applying for the opportunity to work with us and to work in Europe with us. We want to provide them just with a framework for considering that their project, even though it's developed for a specific community somewhere in Europe, it also can have impact globally, in a transdisciplinary way. But it can only do so, any artist intervention in any art form in any community can only have that scalable impact if it has a framework that assumes that if someone else picks up the same intervention, decides to do the same kind of art practice with the same kind of community somewhere else, they need to know that that community is different. And it's more than an obvious thing to say. It's different in very nuanced ways at an individual level. So the inclusive design methodology helps to frame the whole vision and aim of voice, and then it helps to reshape. So if there's a transferable art project or a transferable community initiative, the inclusive design model in an equitable way can help to ground that and give it a real basis, and then a relevant framework through which to report its progress as well. I think for some of the newer artists coming through, however old they may be young or they may be new to this particular kind of way of working. But for everyone coming into the Voice Project, my message would be have fun while you're engaging, but also really think about the importance of what you're doing, because artists generally still to this day, more so years ago, but even now, are really encouraged to see themselves as not very important, as not really making an impact, as being content creators for somebody else is much more important technology or political structure. And what we want to do with Voice is actually, no, some of the most transformative movements, theories, interventions in society, historically and on into the future, are made by creative artists, people with those transversal skill sets who know how to collaborate, to see from another's point of view, so that even a small, relatively small budget art intervention can have enormous impact. And what we want to do is amplify that impact through voice, beginning with just encouraging all the artists to remember that their voice is really, really important.